So I'm going to start this video all over again. I lost my train of thought. So I'm going to start, we're going to continue in the book of Leviticus. We are now at the culmination. We have two more Parshas, two more Torah readings that we read to finish the book of Vayikra, of Leviticus. So last week we ended with the case of a person, a man who was born to an Israelite woman who was from the tribe of Dan, who had a relationship, or she had a baby with a Egyptian man. And because the lineage of your tribe comes from your father, this man, as he grew up, had no place. He wanted to pitch his tent, he wanted to make his encampment in the tribe of his mother. But because his father was Egyptian, he didn't belong in the tribe of Dan. And he was very angry. And he went to Moses and he said to Moses, I want to pitch my tent in the tribe of my mother. And the decision that came down, the God says, no, this is not where you belong. You don't belong here. So there's a lot of conversation about that. And he gets very angry and he blasphemes God. So that's not a good thing to do. And for that, he's actually sentenced to death. I don't want to have a conversation about that. I don't want to have a conversation. We talked about it last week, but the idea that that there's things that come that we're not comfortable with, things that we find are like egregious in our day. And I think that it challenges us to understand how it is that there's laws like this that for somebody who it was not his fault that his mother was an Israelite woman and his father was an Egyptian. It's not his fault, and yet he doesn't have a place in the camp of his mother. He doesn't have a place to live there, and with that he is angry and he blasphemes, and that he's not allowed to do. So now in this week's Torah portion, it begins. This week's Torah portion has two readings. The first one is called Behar. Behar, on the mountain of Sinai. So it begins with the concept that, or the idea that God spoke to Moses on Mount Sinai. He spoke to him on Mount Sinai. So we go back to the idea. Why does he have to tell us that he spoke to us on Mount Sinai? We know that God spoke to Moses on Mount Sinai. And we know that Moses comes down. He comes down with the 10 Commandments. And the conversation that had with many of the commentators is what did God give Moses on Mount Sinai? To give us the whole Torah. It was all of our guidebook for how to live our lives was given to Moses at Mount Sinai. Or was it most of it given or some of it given, and then the rest of it was given through the tent of meeting, through the tabernacle in the desert as the children were traveling? And that was what he continued to teach to the Jewish people. So there's a conversation in the sources as to what exactly was given at Mount Sinai, but goes on to tell us that what's given at Mount Sinai, this exactly was given at Mount Sinai. Speak to the children of Israel and say to them, when you come into the land is Israel. When you come into the land of Israel, that I will give you, the Jewish people, the land will observe a Sabbath rest for Hashem, for God. For 6 years you may sow your fields, and for 6 years you may prune your vineyard, and you may gather in its crop. But the 7th year shall be a complete rest for the land, a Sabbath for Hashem. Your field you shall not sow, and your vineyard you shall not prune. It's an amazing concept, right? The concept is that the land is entitled to a Sabbath, a sabbatical year. After 6 years of plowing and planting and reaping and working the land, the 7th year is a Sabbath, is a rest, and you can't do those things. So we're told all the things that we're not allowed to do. Let me see if I can find my papers here. The things that we're not allowed to do in the sabbatical year. Oh, I guess I can't find my papers. Anyway, but the things that you're not. Oh, here it is. Oh no, it's not here. Sorry. Oh well. There's a whole bunch of things that we're not allowed to do. You're not allowed to reap. You're not allowed to sow. All of these things. Everything has to stay. Everything has to stay fallow. You let it go. You rest that land. It becomes like a Sabbath, almost like the land has a holiness. God has a holiness, and God is holy. God is the source of all holiness. When we attach ourselves to God, we become holy. Moses was considered the holiest of all men because, and on some level, when he went up to Mount Sinai, he went up into the heavens, that he became almost like an angelic being, came back to earth. So it was sort of like a mixture, like his face was shining with the divine light, and go on and on, like what it was that Moses was. But Moses was able to reach a level of holiness such that God could talk to him face to face, so to speak, and transmit and give to him all the guidance that we will need, not just the Jewish people in the wilderness after coming out of Egypt, but all of us for all time. This is a guidebook for us for all time. So the idea that we as people can become holy, we can attach ourselves to the source of holiness, we can attach ourselves to God, will elevate us, will give us a sense of being holy people. So there's a sense of holiness of the people. There's a sense of holiness in time. We've talked before, and obviously there's a concept we all know about of the Sabbath day. There's 6 days of working, 6 days of the land being, six days of work where we go out into the world and we work and we produce and we achieve different things. We're doing, we're going, and then Sabbath is this rest day where we stop. We take a step back. We rest. We let go. We let go and we take a step back, and that's the day where we have a relationship with God. We have a relationship with ourselves, with our spiritual side, where we get in touch with that spiritual side of who we are. And so that's the idea of the 6 days of work. We have to work. There's an idea that work is important. It's important to work in those days. It's almost like an imperative to work during the 6 days, and then the 7th day is a rest day. So too, we work the land, and you plow the land, and you plant, and you reap, and you do all those things. And then there's a 7th day, and that 7th year is a land rest year. Like the land has a holiness, people have holiness. We have to rest. God rested on the 7th day, so we rest on the 7th day. The land rests on the 7th year. The land is imbued with a certain holiness. The land and the Jewish people are intertwined. The land, the Jewish people, and God are intertwined. The land has a certain holiness, and we are enjoined to take care of it. God tells us you have to let it rest. That's an important part of what you must do when you enter into the land. So if you were to say, well, what's going to happen in the 7th year? How am I going to manage? What's going to happen in the 8th year and the 9th year? How am I going to manage? So God tells us in the Torah, if you will say, what will we eat in the 7th year? Behold, we will not sow and not gather in the crops. I, God, will ordain my blessing for you in the 6th year, and it will yield a crop sufficient for the 3-year period. You will sow in the 8th year, and you will eat from the old crop until the 9th year, until the arrival of its crop. You will eat the old. So God is promising us that if you do this, that you'll get sort of extra crop on the 6th year. There's a sense of, or a need for faith and trust. I'm going to trust that God's going to take care of me, the farmer, going to take care of the land. Like in order to be able to do this with a full heart, we have to recognize that it's out of our control, right? The land is God's. The land is God's. And it's a big lesson in understanding that everything is owned by God. The land is owned by God, and the world is owned by God. And we walk around, and the natural world is owned by God. And on some level, everything we have is owned by God. Like we're just sojourners. We are just traveling through this world. What we continue to learn about in this week's Torah portion is not just that there's a 7th sabbatical year that happens after 6 years of working land, but that there's a cycle of 7 times 7 sabbatical years. So after 7 sabbatical years, that then the 50th year is called the Jubilee year, the Yovel year. And in that year, everything goes free. Everything goes back to its original owners. The land that you have owned goes back to its ancestral owners. And any Hebrew slave you may has to be set free. So there's a freedom throughout the land. That's where we get the saying on the Liberty Bell in Philadelphia is from this week's Torah portion, that there will be freedom throughout the land. There's freedom of the land, and there's freedom of people, meaning that we don't own any of this. We are sojourners. The land is given to us. The land is holy. We are holy. That the servant, the slave, the person across from you is also holy. We all are created b'tselem Elokim, in the image of God. We're all holy, and we all have that capacity to fuse into a unity. Meaning, if you go back to the beginning of this week's Torah portion, where it says that God spoke to Moses on Mount Sinai, why do we have to learn again on Mount Sinai? So the idea of Mount Sinai is that Mount Sinai, this mountain, was a very low mountain. It was a humble mountain. It was not the big Swiss Alps. It was a little mountain, to transmit the idea that the holiness that this mountain that is attributed to this mountain is because God came down onto that mountain, right? There was something that that God wanted to reveal to the Jewish people, and it was down on this mountain. But the holiness that the mountain had was only because God came down on that mountain at that time. It was a very low mountain. It was a mountain that represented loneliness and humility, just like Moses is the paradigm, is the example for us, for somebody who is completely holy, completely humble and holy, completely humble, able to recognize his own talents, recognize his own strengths, and yet know that they're all for service of God. They're all to connect him to God. They're all to be the servant of God in this world. So yes, you might recognize that he's a good leader at some point through his sojourn, through being a leader, like in the beginning, obviously at the burning bush, he says, I don't want to be the leader, but then he takes it on and he becomes the leader, and he understands this, that he is the mouthpiece for God in the world, and he is going to, because of his humility. So the concept of humility is something that pervades this whole Torah and pervades our work on ourselves to minimize our egos, to become more humble, so that we can be vessels, so we can receive more of the holiness and more of the blessing that God wants to bring into the world. And again, how do we do that? We do that by working on ourselves, by recognizing that the Torah came from this low mountain, right? The mountain wasn't this big mountain that's great, that all people have the potential to become holy and to lift themselves up and to raise themselves up. All people. And again, this idea of Shemitah, the idea of the 7th year lying fallow and the 50th year, is just again to remind us that we're all equal. Like, some people might own a lot of land, and some people have a little bit of land, but in the 50th year, it all goes back. Like, you don't own it anymore. It's not yours anymore. Like, it goes back to its original owner. I'm not sure what they do in Israel now, but back then there was really it was an equalizing. Like, I really love the idea of why the Jewish people dance in circles. Like, we don't do line dances, we dance in a circle. We dance in a circle to reiterate the idea that we're all equal, right? We're all equidistant from the center. We're all, when we were at Mount Sinai, we circled the mountain and we were all equal. We were all seen as important and necessary individuals that made up the collective. There was a unity of the Jewish people. Ish echad b'lev echad. We were one people with one heart. And that's what we're trying to get back to. So when it says in this week Torah portion that it was given at Mount Sinai, one of the ideas that we're supposed to understand is that, yes, we are all equal. Nobody's better than anybody else. Some people might have, more talents in this area or more gifts in that area, or be stronger, or be this and that and the other, work on themselves more, fine. But essentially, we all have the same potential to become the most holy people that we can become. We have that potential. I heard a great story. I hope you like this story. There's a story about a man who goes to synagogue. I don't know what generation where we're at. It was at the time of the Baal Shem Tov, who was the beginning of the Hasidic movement. So the Baal Shem Tov is in this village, and he sees this man. He goes to shul. So this man goes to synagogue every day, and he sits in the pews, and he sits there for hours and hours and hours and hours and hours. He's got his prayer book in front of him, and he goes for hours. So the Baal Shem Tov goes in and he says, "It's amazing. Like, like you spend so much time in synagogue. What are you doing?" And he says, "Well, the fact is that I don't know what I'm saying. I know how to read Hebrew, but I don't know what I'm saying, and I don't know what I'm supposed to say when. So I come into the synagogue and I read the book from page 2 all the way to the end. Every day I read the whole book. And I come in for the afternoon service and I read the whole book. And I come in at the evening service and I read the whole book, because I don't know what I'm supposed to say when." So the Baal Shem Tov says, "Would you like me to help you?" And he says, "Yes, I'd love you to help me." So he says, "Okay." So he goes through and he says, "This is what you say in the morning, and this is what you say in the afternoon." And he puts all his little sticky notes, or whatever they had back then, to indicate this is when you say this, and this is what you say on the Sabbath, and this is what you say on the holidays, and da da da. And he does it all. And the man's so happy, and he comes out of the synagogue and he's holding his prayer book with all the little notes stuck in the different places, and he's dancing, and he's so happy that he knows what to say. And this holy man taught him what to say and when to say it, and as he's dancing around and he's like, has his book in his hands, all the little pieces of paper flutter out of the book and they land on the floor, and he's grief stricken. He's like, "Oh no, now what?" So he runs after the Baal Shem Tov. So the Baal Shem Tov he'd already left the village, and so he gets to this raging river. The Baal Shem Tov's walking to the next village, and he comes to this river, and it's a raging river. So the Baal Shem Tov looks around and he sees there's no one looking, because, he's an elevated person. He's able to make miracles happen for him. And he takes the sash, the gartel that is around his waist, and he takes it and he throws it to the other side, holds on to one end, and he throws it to the other side of the river. And it goes to the other side of the river. And when it lands, it becomes hardened. So then the Baal Shem Tov walks on the hardened sash that he had, the garter that he had around his, and he gets to the other side and he continues to walk. So the man, this man who wasn't able to know what he was saying in the prayer book, who wants some help with his prayer book, he runs, he sees this from afar, and he comes and he says, well, I'll do that. So he takes his sash off and he throws it over, he holds on, and it also becomes hardened, and he's able to walk over, and he catches up with the Baal Shem Tov. And he says, excuse me, can you help me? And he says, how did you get here? Like, how did that happen? And he said, well, I saw what you did, so I did what you did. And so the moral of the story is that, yes, you think that this holy Baal Shem Tov, who started this movement of this massive movement that we still love today, that he was a special person, he was a holy person, and miracles happened for him. Like for him, you could understand that the gartel turned into something hard that he could walk across. But the idea is that even this simple man who didn't even understand what the prayers were that he's saying, but he had the yearning, he had the intention, and he wanted it, and then he had a sincerity, and he had a genuineness about him, and he wasn't about his ego, and he was yearning for that he was able to achieve what the Baal Shem Tov was able to achieve. And I think that's an important lesson when we read about Behar Sinai, at Mount Sinai, the fact that we all had that potential. We all have that potential. We're all born with a holy soul. And we all have the potential to elevate ourselves and to raise ourselves up. And we all have the potential to do that. And that story of the Baal Shem Tov is a story that kind of like, illustrates that. But I think another idea is that at Mount Sinai, where we were like one man with one heart, we have a soul. Each one of us has a soul. So another thing I learned is that our soul it is in our bodies, so to speak, whatever that means, as much as our body is in our shoe. So we have our shoe, obviously, and only the bottom part of our body is in the shoe. So similarly, our body is like a shoe, and the soul is like our body. So the amount of soul that we actually have in our body is like what we have in our shoes. A small portion of our soul is in our body, and the rest is above us. And so when we were at Mount Sinai and we were like one body with one soul, with one heart, with one, right? So the souls are sort of like around were able to intermingle and able to unite. And I think that's a beautiful way to understand, like there's all this stuff going on that we don't have any concept of, that's happening in the transcendent world. And we're very physically based. We sort of think in physicalities, but yet to understand there's a lot in the physical world we don't know. Obviously, in the corona day, we don't know a lot about the physical world, but we also don't know a lot about the spiritual world. And I think it's important to recognize that there's a lot going on that we don't know anything about. Today, Monday night, Tuesday, we're already into Tuesday now, obviously, but the day that we just left behind, Tuesday, was the 33rd day of the Omer. We had just left Egypt, and on the second day of Passover, we started counting. We counted we are counting 49 days until we get to the next holiday of Shavuot. So we're in that interim period where we're counting 49 days. It's 7 times 7 into 49. This last day that we just had was the 33rd day of the Omer. And this was the day that Shimon Bar Yochai died. So Shimon Bar Yochai was a student of Rabbi Akiva. So he was a man that got in trouble with the Romans, and he ran away, he and his son, and they ran into a cave. And they went into the cave, and they didn't want their clothes to wear away, so they buried themselves in this cave, and they learned the inner secrets of the Torah. The Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai is the source for the Holy Zohar, for all these Kabbalistic teachings that we know. So he's one of the sources for Kabbalah is the Zohar, and he wrote that. And for 12 years he lived in this cave, which is interesting because we're in a cave-like experience now. We're in our homes. We're sort of pulled away from the outside world. We're not allowed to interact with the outside world too much. We have to go inside. And what Shimon Bar Yochai did in that time was that he accessed the spiritual realms. He was able to kind of transcend his physicality and understand secrets that we learn about now in Kabbalistic teachings. When he came out after 12 years, he was very critical, and he saw the world in a very critical way, and had to go back. A heavenly voice came out and said, you have to go back into the cave. And you have to learn how to be compassionate. You have to learn how to be kind. You have to learn how to see with compassionate and kind eyes before you can come back out into the world. So on the 13th year, it comes back out into the world. But the idea of going in order to come out. So he went into that cave for 12 years, 13 years to understand more of the transcendent world, to understand more about spirituality. And then he could come out and push that out into the world. And perhaps that's a lesson for us today. Like, we are pushed into our homes, we're pushed into our caves. And what can we learn? What can we, that we're not the Baal Shem Tov and we're not Shema Bar Yachai, but we are all created in the image of God, and we all have these heavenly souls, and we all have a way of reading or being on the internet or finding or working on ourselves and refining ourselves and pulling the world up and becoming more holy in our homes. We don't have to go out into the world to do it. We can do it in our homes. So let's go back to the idea of Behar Sinai. So on Mount Sinai, we have this humble mountain. So work on humility. That could be something we could be doing at in this day and age. Is definitely working on our humility. So that's one thing. And then this unity, the unity of all being together at Mount Sinai in order to receive the Torah. We did that. So God's saying, when you go into the land, you're going to take care of the land. You have to look after the land. You have to let it lay fallow. You have to give it a Sabbath. It has to have a rest year. And in doing that, you're going to recognize that God runs the world, that all your work is important and you have to put in the work. But at the end of the day, whether you're successful or not is not up to you. We know people who work very hard and don't make a lot of money. We know people who don't work very hard and do make a lot of money. So the computation of how, like, the more you put in, the more you get out. Maybe not in terms of your material acquisitions. Like, are we out there to increase and accumulate material possessions? What are we here for? Like, what are you going to spend your time doing? How are you going to spend your time when you're in your house? What are you going to do with that time? You're going to, like, work to refine yourself and to understand more about how the world works and how you work and who we are, and learn a bit of Torah here and there. What are you going to do? So that's something to think about. So the idea of going in to come out. So Shema Bar Yachai goes in to come out, and that's one of the reasons I understood why there's a tradition to use play with bows and arrows on Lag BaOmer, which is the 33rd day of the Omer. Play with the arrow, because you have to pull back on the arrow and then let go. You pull back, go back, pull back inside, go into the more internal, so that you can project forward and you can take that and put that out into the world. I thought that was a really nice idea. And the idea of fires, why there's bonfires, different reasons, but maybe some of them are more historical. But the more the Kabbalistic ideas is that the fire, we have a soul that's on fire. And can we let that fire out? Can we bring out the secrets of the Torah? Can the secrets of the Torah have expression? Can we access those? And today people are learning more Kabbalistic ideas. Those are the hidden aspects of the Torah. So that's another reason why I think we have fires. I like the idea of using the fire to understand another concept. And this speaks of holiness, which we talked about in previous Torah portions, but also in this week's Torah portion, when we're talking about the land as being holy, we're talking about people being holy. And we're talking about time being holy. So the Sabbath is holy. This Shemitah year is like the Sabbath of the land. And so I heard an analogy given Rabbi Nagain in Othniel, and he suggested that if we look at the natural world, if you look at the sun, if you understand what the sun is a huge source of power and energy and heat and light, and we are aware of it. It's positioned perfectly in relation to the earth for us to receive the light, for us to receive the right amount of energy, that we don't burn up the world and we don't freeze, that we have the light from the sun and the energy from the sun. There's so much we get from the sun, but we understand that it's coming from the sun. We understand there it is. If you look at a stone or a rock, there's energy inside the rock. We understand now the concepts of atomic energy, and that inside each inanimate object there's atoms that are moving inside. We don't see the movement. It's hidden inside a rock. There's hidden energy that we don't see, but it's there, right? We do see the energy of the sun, but we don't see the energy of the rock. Equal sources of energy, but different revelations of that, different ability to see it. So too, the land of Israel has a certain energy and holiness to it that maybe we can't see it. Maybe it's not like looking at the sun, but there's something special about that land. There's something special about being in Jerusalem. There's something special about being on Har Moriah, where the Holy Temple stood. There's an access of holiness and energy that's there, whether we have the antenna to pick it up or not, whether we can recognize it or not, it's there. Which might be and is probably more revealed energy and more revealed holiness than there is where I live in Providence, Rhode Island. Not that it isn't here, but there's more revelation of it there. I think that's a nice way to understand it. It was a good way from I understood it. But taking that now one more level is an idea that when we have this revealed holiness, when we understand that there's holiness that's more in the land, or we understand that there's energy to be had that we could tap into, that maybe that could give us a window into our natural world. I can say with my words that there's holiness in nature. If you look at nature and you see God behind the scenes, it's God created the world and he sustains the world and he's immanent in the world, and in nature is the veil that behind which God is hiding. So when we see, as I do, as I walk around my neighborhood, the flowers and the trees and the blossoms and the colors and the varieties and the shapes and the different blends of colors, and it's just beautiful. That if I can see behind that nature and say God's behind all this, that God is here, right? I can see God making the blossoms open, and I can see that the seeds are opening, and I plant a seed and it starts to sprout. That's God behind that. It's God making that happen. So it's an amazing idea just to think that that's when we use the natural world to try to access God in our immanent world, then to take that into the transcendent world and say, well, are there ways that I can see God in my life? Are there ways that I can see God in my life? And perhaps one of them is very difficult to do. It's leaving the land fallow. If I leave the land fallow, what will be? And God promises in the continuation of this week's Torah portion that if you will say, what will we eat in the seventh year? If I'm going to plant for 6 years, but I'm not going to plant and reap and sow in the seventh year, what am I going to eat in the seventh year? God says, we will not, behold, we will not sow and not gather in the crops, but I, God, will ordain my blessing for you in the sixth year, and it will yield a crop sufficient for a 3-year period. You will sow in the 8th year, and you will eat from the old crop until the 9th year. Until the arrival of its crop, you will eat the old. God's promising us, have faith. If you do this, I'll take care of you. I'll make there be more blessing. There'll be enough food. I'll take care of you. Can we believe that? Can we have faith and trust in that? Can we stop on Sabbath and say, I'm going to work all week and then I'm going to stop because you're really in charge. God, you're really in charge. I don't own anything. I'm just a sojourner through this life, through this world, and that you, God, are in charge and you own it and it's all yours. And the lesson of faith and trust to say, I'm going to stop on Friday afternoon and I'm not going to put into the world. I'm not going to try to work more hours or, make that business deal. I'm going to not do it because it's not up to me. It's not up to me. It's up to God, right? There's a level of faith and trust that we have to have every week, 6 days to the 7th. And now every 6 years to the 7th year of Shemitah. And then we do this Yovel year where we get to the 7 times 7, the 50th year of Yovel, where we're letting the slaves go and we're letting the ancestral lands go back to the ancestral owners, and we're giving up everything. Everything becomes hefka. Everything becomes ownerless. It's an amazing concept that we're told to do. And I think it's about one of the things that it says that it's about is helping us realize that we're dependent on God. You're dependent on God for everything. I remember an exercise I did when I was training to be a hospice volunteer. And they asked us to take 5 different pieces of paper. And on each piece of paper, write something that you really love. Something you love to do, or something you love to eat, or somebody that you love. Like write down 5 things that you love. So we did that. And then the presenter said, now give me one of those. So you give up one of them. So you look through your list. Okay, so I give up my chocolate ice cream. I'll give that one up. Okay, fine. And I give up another one. All right, so now I'll give up my bed. I love my bed, whatever. Give that one up. Okay, fine, give that one up. And then you keep going and you give them all up. give them all up. And they said that's what it's like to be a person who's transitioning out of this world. When you're transitioning out of this world, when you're dying and you know that death is coming, then none of it matters. Like you, when you need it, it matters. But at the end of this sojourn through this world, you won't need that anymore. It's not what you need. You don't need the ice cream. You don't need the bed, right? You need whatever you need. You need to accrue good deeds, good name. Whatever you give away is what you keep, right? You give tzedakah, you give to good causes, you give to sustain people and to feed people and to clothe people and to do all the things that we give money for. When we do all those things, that's what we take with us. We take with us what we gave away. That's an incredible, like, reverse way of thinking. Like we're going to keep what we give away. Okay, so just hold that one. So the idea that all the laws come from God, the laws of Shemitah come from God, the laws of Shabbos, the Sabbath come from God. It all comes from God on Mount Sinai. Mount Sinai is a humble. We have to be humble. Mount Sinai is about people being unified. We have to be unified. And actually, it says one of the things about what we're really trying to do is to see ourselves as a brotherhood. And over and over and over again in this week's Torah portion, we learn about what to do if somebody becomes impoverished. Says, if your brother becomes impoverished and his means falter in your proximity, you shall strengthen him so that he can live with you. You have to take care of him. Before he falls, you have to take care of him. You have to take care of the people in your midst. You have to take care of people. You have to feed them. You have to clothe them. You have to give them jobs. You have to leave your fields. Even in those 6 years of working the field, you have to make sure that you're strengthening other people, that you're giving to other people. You're leaving your grain that falls during the harvest. You're leaving the corners unharvested. You are abandoning any forgotten sheaves that fell while you were collecting in your harvest. That's what we're doing regularly. And then we get to the Shemitah year, and then we get to the Yovel year, the 50th year, where we're all equal, we're all the same, and nobody owns the land, right? So we all have equal access to the land. Like we're dancing in a circle. Jewish dancing is circle dancing because we're all equidistant from that central point. We're all equal. We all have our souls up here, connecting. We're all like that man in the Shimon Bar Yochai story, where we have the potential to be. I'm going to keep going. Maybe somebody could type if the video is still going. That we still have the potential to be like Shimon Bar Yochai. We just have to yearn for it. We have to want it. We have to have faith, and we have to have trust in God, and we have to do our best. So when the could somebody please just type if this is it's still recording? So we get to the idea of this Yovel year, and the Yovel year is brought into existence, so to speak, by our blowing a shofar. We're going to blow a shofar to bring in the Yovel year. And it's an amazing thing to bring in the Yovel year with a shofar, because the shofar is this sound that we hear. And where do we hear it? On Yom Kippur. Yom Kippur is a day where we go back to our essence. We go back to our inner selves. We go back to that holiness. We are trying to concentrate on our spirituality and be more spiritual than physical. We're trying to be connected to God through our spirituality and not our physicality. And so that's something that we proclaim with the shofar. At the end of Yom Kippur, we proclaim with a shofar, like, okay, it's all come out. I'm pristine. I'm clean. You have forgiven me. I'm new. I'm starting all over. And that's what we do in the Jubilee year. We've sounded with this shofar as a way to bring us all as equals. We're all equals. There's all loans are absolved, and all debts are in remission, and all fields return to their original owner, and all people are set free. So that's what happens in those years. So God promises us that he'll take care of us, and that he's in control and he owns the land. So we trust that that's the way it'll be. Can we feel God's presence? Can we feel God wherever we're living? Yes, maybe it's easier when we're in Jerusalem and we're at the Western Wall, but can we feel God when we're in our homes, wherever we are? Providence, Rhode Island, can we feel it? What happened at Mount Sinai was God coming down the mountain and meeting us. What happened where the Holy Temple was standing, and where we have the Western Wall on Har Maria, is where we try to access God. We were looking to reach up. So there's these two ways of kind of connecting with God. One is God coming down to us, as God did on Mount Sinai, and then there's us trying to reach up to God as we did on Har Moriah on that mountain where we built the holy temple. So there's this kind of like God coming to reveal himself to us as we're reaching up to him. Okay, so we have this idea of Yovel. We have the idea of 6 days of the week leading into the Shabbat. We have the idea of the 6 years leading to the Shemitah. Then we have the 7 times 7 of the Shemitah leading to the Yovel. And now I want to add another dynamic, another 6 and 7 combination is the 6,000 years and then the 7,000 years. So we right now are in the year 5780, 5,780 of the 6th millennium. So we're in that 6,000th millennium, and then there'll be the 7th one, just like there'll be 6 days of work and the 7th of Shabbat. There's 6,000 years where we're working on ourselves, we're growing, and we're trying to put our all in and do the best we can, so that when we get to that 7,000 year, we've we've done the best we can. So this world we're still in that 6th millennium, but we understand there will be the days of when Messiah will come and the Mashiach will come. That will be a 40-year period, and then there'll be this this time called the Tchiyat HaMetim, where everything that ever was alive, anything that ever was in the past alive will come back to life. There'll be life. So it's hard for us to understand because we see time as linear. I heard an analogy of like if you were standing on a platform in a train station and you watch the train go by. So there's cars of the train going by, and there's another car, another car, another car, another car, and it's like those are the days of our lives or the years of our lives, but they're passing by and they're going, and you don't see them anymore. They're gone. Whereas God, who created time, is outside of that. God is looking down onto all the time that ever was, all the time that ever existed, and he sees the whole thing. So there isn't a past and a present and a future. There just is. We're in the lens of past, present, and future because that's how we see time. But God doesn't see time like that. God sees the whole thing because he created time. So at some point, everything that ever passed us by is going to just be there, and it's going to come back. So people who died, the body and soul, the bodies will come back to life. There'll be a resurrection. There'll be a reliving, a kind of everything will begin, will continue to live, will continue to live. And so I like the idea of that train issue, that train idea, because if you look above it, it isn't a train, it just is. So everything that we see as having died didn't really die, it's still there. So when we die in our lives, we understand death, our souls leave our body, but the soul continues on, and our body is like a seed, and it goes into the ground. Just like when you put a seed into the ground, it decomposes into the earth, and then it sprouts again. Then it grows into something, it grows into a tree, or it goes back into something that it was before. The seed came from the tree, and it's going to sprout, and it's going to grow again. So too, our body gets put into the ground like a seed, and the soul goes into the world of souls, and it hangs out in the world of souls, whatever that is. And then at the right time, after the world of Mashiach, of the Messiah, then there'll be a resurrection. There'll be a re-coming together of that soul and that seed that was planted in the ground. There'll be a Tchiyat HaMetim, or resurrection of the dead. And then we're going to transition into the 7,000th year. That 7th millennium will be like a Shabbat. That is what we consider to be the world to come, Olam Haba. And we all have a portion of Olam Haba. It's supposed to be a really amazing place to be. I don't know, it's a place, it's a reality that we've created. We're going to exist in Olam Haba. There's going to be that reality for us, and it's likened unto the 6 days and the 7, or the 6 years and the 7. And we're getting every week, we are getting a lesson in that 6 days and 7. There's a 6 days of work and 7th day of rest, and it's actually said over in the oral tradition that the Sabbath is a little bit of the world to come. It's a little taste of the world to come, which is really interesting to think, because the 6,000 of our existence then ends with the 7th millennium, which is the world to come. That world to come, and we get a taste of it, a little bit of taste of it every Shabbat. So I think that's and just to think about how we size up time and what we do with time and how we put time into categories and how we kind of like count things and we see where we're going. And yet God looks at the whole thing. And I wonder when we're sitting here in our COVID stay at home orders and we're in our homes and we're thinking, well, one day I'll get out and one day I'll do this. But maybe it's really a lesson in saying, well, yes, there's time and we see time as like this train at the station, but there's also the whole block of time where it's all about us working on ourselves and connecting with something beyond ourselves, connecting to God, connecting to spirituality, connecting to each other. How can we can do that? All right, we might not have the same avenues of doing that, but also we have a lot less distractions. There's a lot less that's going to distract us that could actually help us focus on doing that now. So anyway, so that's that. And then so this idea of raising up the person who's impoverished, that if there's somebody who's impoverished in your midst, you have to help him, you have to lift them up, you have to give them, you have to bring them up to a secure place. The second Torah portion that we would be reading in the shul is Bechukosai, and that's about how we walk with God. If we're going back to what happened at Mount Sinai. At Mount Sinai, we made a covenant with God. God said, here's the Torah. I want you to live by the Torah. If you live by the Torah, all will be good. And that's what we learn again at the end of this book of Leviticus that we're now reading, that we get to the end of the book of Leviticus. And at the very end, it says, okay, we had this covenant with Moses, with that God made with us at Mount Sinai. We messed up with the golden calf. We had that whole episode of the golden calf. And now we're coming back. We're working on ourselves. We're doing what best we can. And we're working. And God says, okay, here it is. I'm giving it to you again. Here's that same covenant I gave you at Mount Sinai. Here it is over again. If you follow my ways, if you shoot your arrow into the bullseye, or you're a little bit off, but you're working towards that bullseye. If you do that, I will shower you with blessings. I will shower you with physical blessings, with rain and fruit, trees that will bear fruit, and the threshing will be good, and you'll eat bread, and you'll live securely, and you'll have peace, and there'll be no wild animals, and there'll be no swords in the land, and you'll have no enemies, and I will bless you and make you fruitful, increase you, and establish my covenant with you, and clear out the old, and etc. And God will walk with us, and I will walk with you like I did, like I wanted to when you were in the Garden of Eden. We go back to the beginning of Genesis, where God created Adam and Eve, and he put them in the Garden of Eden, and he says, I want to walk with you, walk with me in the Garden of Eden. And obviously we know the story that Adam and Eve ate from the tree of knowledge of good and evil, and they were banished from the garden. But in the garden, God's saying, I want to walk with you. And God's saying that again now. I want to walk with you. He says, I want to walk with you. But if you treat me casually, if you don't care about me, if you're not looking to have a relationship with me, then that's the kind of relationship that I will have with you. The way in which you relate to me will be the way that I relate to you. And I think that's a very crucial concept for us to understand, is that we need to want it in order to get it. It's not going to fall out of the heavens, I don't think. I don't understand. Anyway, but if you walk with me, and this word for walk casually, Kerry, if you are casual with me, if you are rebellious and you think everything's just by chance and everything's just an accident, then that's the way it will be. However, if you don't, if you turn to me and you see that God's in charge and you yearn for that relationship, then it will be good. It will be good with you. So this idea of how we relate to God will be how God relates to us is integral to this week's Torah portion. And if we turn away, then God will turn away. And if we turn towards, then God will turn towards us. So part of it is really yearning to be connected. So I heard this saying, I'm not quite sure how it fits in, but act as if everything depends on you. So I guess this goes back to the whole idea of Shemitah. I'll come back to that in a minute. So let's see, let's just recap a little bit. So we have beginning of the week's Torah portion, Behar on Mount Sinai. We're given the laws of Shemitah. We're given the idea that you have to let the land rest. It's not just something you have to think about, something you actually have to do. It's going to take a huge amount of trust and faith for you to leave your land fallow. No agricultural work will you be doing on the land in the 7th year. So just like there's Sabbath after the 6 days of the week, just as God created for 6 days and rested and said, you too. I created the world, said God, you have to rest. I rested. In order to be holy, you also have to rest. You also have to have a Shabbat. You have to have that day where you switch off and you don't do business deals and you don't deal with money and you don't work on your phone and you just stop and you let go. You're going to do that every seventh day. That's going to be a lesson for you for all time. And there's going to be this 6 years of working the land and then a seventh year of rest. It's the same concept. The land also has to rest. The land also has a holiness to it, and it also has to have that lesson that you will learn from that, which is that the land doesn't belong to you, that you don't own the land. The land is holy and the land needs to rest. And that's going to be a big lesson for us, not to spend our lives accumulating material things. Let's not spend our lives accumulating material things, because at the end of the day, we're not going to keep it. And then we have the idea of the way in which we walk. So the Shemitah year is the seventh cycle, and then 7 times 7 is the 49. Letting go of the land, letting go of the people that in your service, like the slaves get to go free. Everybody going back to the original reset button. We're going to start all over again. There's an equality. All people are equal. All people have the potential to lift themselves into higher and higher realms. We're all created in the image of God. We all have the most of our soul hovering somewhere above us that can unite with all people, and we should really work to do that. So the idea of equality, the idea of dancing in a circle, recognizing that there's no one person is closer to anything than anybody else. We're all part of the plan, and to trust God and to feel and to try to feel His presence. So we talked about the analogy of the sun being a revealed source of energy and the rock being a hidden source of energy. So too, there are places, people, and times that have more revealed holiness to them. The Sabbath, the holidays, Yom Kippur, are islands in time where the holiness is more accessible to us. We have places that are more holy and more accessible holiness in Jerusalem and the Holy Temple. And we have people who are connecting themselves and attaching themselves to godliness and to God's ways and walking in God's ways, and that they also are able to become holier people, and we all have the potential for that, as evidenced by that story about the Baal Shem Tov. The last idea I just want to stress is this idea of us looking after each other, and that the brotherhood, that yes, the idea of the unity is also an idea about brotherhood. So if there's somebody who is impoverished or is on their way to being impoverished, we have to take care of them. We don't charge them interest. We treat each other like we're brothers, and we have a responsibility to each other. So that's something that was reiterated in this week's Torah portion, about taking care of other people and being responsible for other people, and making sure everybody has, at least the basics of food and shelter and clothing, that everybody should have that. So the only other idea that I wanted to bring out is the idea of toiling in Torah. So that it is about observing the mitzvot. It is about connecting to God through, by doing the Shemitah year, by doing the Sabbath, by eating kosher food, etc., etc. But there's also a concept of toiling in Torah. There's also a concept that a lot of these things are so hard to understand, and maybe we're turned off, and maybe we're angry, and maybe we're this, and maybe that. And so it's hard work to get in touch with holiness and with God, and seeing it in the Torah. And that's toiling. It's not easy. If it was easy, we'd all do it. That we have to really work at it. It has to become a part of us. It's almost like they say that the Jewish people are like a fish, and the only sustenance that we have is a fish has is the water. A fish can't live without being in water, and water is likened unto the wisdom that the Torah, through the Torah, through God gives through the Torah to us. So in order for us to live, in order for us to thrive, we have to swim like fish. We have to somehow engrave the Torah. We have to imbue the Torah. The Torah has become us, so that then it's not like, okay, like I become immersed in it, becomes engraved in me, on me, that I become united with some of these ideas. So it's not a struggle anymore. Like like in the beginning, maybe it's a struggle to do something, but then after a while, it's not a struggle anymore. Maybe I don't know. An example was, for me would be as I was keeping kosher and beginning to keep kosher more. So then I wouldn't eat in that restaurant anymore, and that was hard. I wanted to eat in that restaurant, but I didn't. And then after a while, now it's not a struggle. I don't eat in that restaurant because I don't. But at one point, it was a struggle, but now it's not. So I think with anything, there's this sort of progression of learning and growing and putting things behind us, and then recognizing, okay, now I'm at this level, and this is my struggle. So we're all struggling and we're all toiling in Torah. So those are the ideas that I wanted to bring out about this week's Torah portion. And I think a lot of it really does speak about um, the concepts of humility, the concept of holiness, the concepts of understanding that we don't own anything, that we're sojourning through this world, that we only live here for a certain period of time, and then we transition out of this world, that this world is a bridge, a very narrow bridge, that we come from somewhere and we're going somewhere, and all of this existence has a purpose, that we're in the sixth millennium, and this sixth millennium will end and we'll enter into the seventh millennium, which is like the Shabbat. So if nothing else comes out of this talk, I think that this idea, just to contemplate the ideas of 6 and 7, going from 6 days to 7, 6 years to 7, 6,000 years to 7,000 years, that time is delineated and pot marked and separated out, and we have some control over time, and yet it's all down here in this world. Like when we get out of this time bubble, when God is outside of time and sees the whole thing, like the whole train, we're just seeing the carriages going by, but God's seeing the whole train from beginning to end, that it gives us a good different perspective on this life and this world. So yes, we're in this period and it's hard, and we've been through hard periods through our histories, and we've been through a lot of pogroms and holocausts and inquisitions and so on, and yet it's big part of the bigger picture. So it does matter. It matters what we say, it matters what we think, it matters what we do, it matters how we spend our time, even in the COVID days, right? And perhaps even more in the COVID days when we don't have a lot of extra things outside of our home to distract us. So it's even more imperative perhaps to take some of the time that we do have, if we're working, then when we're not working, if we're not working, to take that time to really kind of like think about some of these ideas, just like Shimon Bar Yochai did when he went into that cave, and he had to go inside, he had to go internally to understand some of the secrets of the universe, and then come out and bring that out into the world, and bring it out with the right eyes and without the right lens. So we might come out and be angry, or we could come out and say, wow, like I've learned a lot, and I'm going to put that out into the world. So freedom and taking care of each other and being responsible for each other, and the idea of blessings and the idea of the opposite of a blessing. And final thought is this idea of understanding and experience. So when we have, I heard this amazing idea of a dream. So a dream obviously is an illusion. It's not a real thing. When we go to sleep and we have a dream, the dream feels very, very real to us. But when we wake up, we realize it was a dream. So what's that about? And one of the things I learned about that is that it's almost like the world we live in. Like we think this world is real. We think that everything's happening and everything's real. And yet when we get to the other side, it'll be like a dream. It'll be like, oh, it was an illusion. Okay, well, that wasn't really real, or it was real. They're like, what's real and what's not real? It kind of like makes your head spin. Obviously, it feels real right now, but what's the point of a dream, and what's dream trying to teach us? And I wonder also, kind of like carrying on with that thought, is that sometimes in the dreams we play out things, we have an experience, and it feels very visceral, and it feels very real. Like this is a real experience that I had, and we wake up and we could be like very jarred by our dream. And what are we supposed to do with that, with those feelings when we feel frightened, or we feel scared, or hearts pounding, or something happened, or we were near death, or I don't know what dreams people are having, but to use those experiences to understand like how other people might be feeling. Like if I understand like this was really scary in my dream, but somebody else might be living that now and it's very scary, so I can understand what they're going through, and I can have a perception, so I can be with you, and I can have a different understanding of what you're going through because I've experienced something similar. So those are my Torah thoughts for this week. And I think that at the end of the day, we're here to strengthen each other. We're here to see the brotherhood of each other. We're here to take care of each other. We're here to make a difference. And that we have a call to respond and to do whatever we can to do that. So I wish you all a good week.